I had a seminary homiletics professor, a preaching prof, years ago who regularly made what I thought were unreasonable demands of seminarians. For example, he insisted that every sermon we prepared, and we had to prepare a sermon a week, not to preach to a congregation because they wouldn't let us out yet, but we had to prepare a sermon a week, and he insisted that every sermon title be exactly 4 words. Now, of course, we could pick the 4 words, but a sermon title of 1 word, 2 word, 3 words, 5, 6, 7, 8 words or more was unacceptable, and none of us understood it, and to this day I don't understand what he was trying to get at. He called it the sweet spot. What does that mean for a sermon title, right? The sweet spot. But I had to pass the class, so I created sermons of 4 words, like this morning. Questions from the Roadside. That's not my first title, by the way. Here are some of the rejects for this morning's message of the Good Samaritan. Be nice to people. Lend a helping hand. Don't judge too quickly. Do what you can. Are you coming back? Okay. Sorry. I'm sorry. It just makes me feel insecure when somebody walks out. And I'm on my 8th line. That's it. Where was I? 4-word sermons. It could be you. It could be worse. Support your local pastors. Oh, no, that's not supposed to be there. Turn the other cheek. It's good to help. God is watching you. Support your local pastor. No, I'm sorry, that's not. Get your hands dirty. Don't ever look away. Are you the problem? So I decided questions from the Roadside. Jesus tells a story about a 17-mile stretch of pathway, roadside, stretching from Jerusalem to Jericho. I traveled that road once, over 25 years ago, with a savvy tour guide who was more than happy to declare on that road the exact spot where the Good Samaritan came to the aid of the victim. What he apparently didn't know is that the story was a parable, which means it was a story and not an actual event. But we gave him a pretty good tip anyway. A Lutheran pastor, which Chris read, Nadia Bolz-Weber, reminds us of the contemporary reading. The story of the Good Samaritan is sort of ingrained into our understanding, whether we are regular churchgoers or have never been to church. I think most people, if you said the Good Samaritan, they have an idea of what Good Samaritan is, right? For example, we have Good Samaritan laws. Good Samaritan laws, if you are helping in the case of an emergency or an injury or an accident, and you can't be sued if you are operating with good intentions. And it's not uncommon, of course, for healthcare facilities to name themselves Good Samaritan Hospital, Good Samaritan Medical Center. In my first church in Queens, New York, we established a senior citizen retreat center. We call it the Good Samaritan Senior Center. So even if you can't find the book of Luke in the Bible, most people have a pretty good idea what the Good Samaritan is all about. And the lessons are plentiful, such as show kindness, offer mercy, it's good to be helpful, don't ignore a person in need, don't be an uninvolved bystander at the end of the day. Fred Rogers, Mr. Rogers was right. Be a good neighbor, especially on the highways and roadways and byways and pathways. A little background to the story, which I think we all know quite well. Religiously, Samaritans and Jews were sort of distant relatives. They did not mix well. There were differences in ethnic origins. They worshiped at different sites. Samaritans worshiped in the northern regions of Israel, and they emphasized certain passages in the Hebrew scriptures. Jews, of course, worshiped in the most sacred site in the temple in Jerusalem and lifted up other significant passages in the Hebrew Bible. Pious Jews considered Samaritans were not worthy inheritors of the kingdom. And there was tension and there was feuding, and thus the first century Jew would never use the designation ever of a good Samaritan. That's like someone saying the good terrorist. Now, I have no doubt all of us are able to work out in the context of our own lives the ways in which we understand and sometimes even act like the Good Samaritan. And if I asked for examples this morning, I am sure if I said, how have you acted as a Good Samaritan in recent days, weeks, and months, we would be here into the late afternoon hours, right? We do Good Samaritan work as individuals, as a congregation, as part of a larger denomination. And by way of background, much could be said about the priest and the Levite, the two religious professionals who walked by the bruised victim, and chose for reasons to be on their own way, to move along without intervening. I know a multitude of sermons and messages have been directed at their lack of compassion, and I'm not about to add to them. So here's what I find intriguing about this most familiar story Jesus tells. No one ever talks about the victim. There's the lawyer who asks the question of Jesus, who's my neighbor? There's the priest, there's the Levite. I've never heard a sermon, I've never preached a sermon, I've never read a meditation, I've never known anyone to speak on behalf of the victim. I can't offer answers because I don't have them, but I can ask a lot of questions, like 28 or 29. And if one or two or more of them speak to you and cause you to ponder your life, past, present, and future, then by God's grace, maybe I've done something good this morning. Consider these as questions from the roadside. Have you ever known the experience, literally or figuratively, of lying in the roadside? Real or imagined? Was it your fault or was it someone else's? Is it difficult for you to ask for help, to receive help, to be the recipient of someone who wants to help you? Is receiving help for you a sign of weakness or embarrassment? Is your outer protective crust so hardened that you are unable to receive what others want to give? Do you look down on others who are unconscious on the road? If you are a victim on the road from Jerusalem to Jericho, how will you stop the cycle of victimhood? Do you imagine you can ever forgive those responsible for your plight? What would forgiveness look like? How do you dissolve the bitterness that every day gnaws a little bit deeper and a little bit deeper and a little bit deeper? How do you rid yourself of the need for retribution? Do you ever imagine seeing the good in the one or in those who left you for dead? How do you convince yourself that life is still worth living? Will you ever stop wishing the worst in the ones who trampled your integrity? What do you need to do to make the present you're living in better than the past that you can't seem to forget? How do you ask for help? And is asking for help always the last resort? Can you find some measure of peace in admitting you can't make happen what you thought you could make happen? Can you forgive yourself for the baggage you still carry? Can you imagine sharing your vulnerability? Can you ever truly trust again? Is rock bottom face down on the roadside where you plan to stay? How do you confess a sin, a moral lapse that you hope never sees the light of day? How do you gather the determination to walk down that road again, knowing that the first time was such a royal disaster? Have you ever admitted you might not be able to do this alone? How do you avoid becoming calcified and hardened after taking such a beating? Have you yet convinced yourself of the truth that the whole miserable mess wasn't your fault? Or maybe it was. Have you forgiven God for not protecting you? Or if God has, have you given thanks for such protection? Those are some questions from the roadside. May at least one of those questions find a connection in your life. A real Good Samaritan story coming up. About a month ago, I pulled up to the drive-up window of a local Lake Michigan credit union branch to withdraw some cash. I was low on cash, needed some cash. I included in that drive-up window my driver's license. I put it into the plastic tube and sent it to the window teller. She sent the tube back with a receipt for me to sign for the $100 in cash. I signed it, sent it back. She sent it back with the $100, and I put it in my pocket, and I closed the tube, and I left to do some errands. And I realized about 10 minutes later that I didn't have my driver's license. You know, has that ever happened to you? At a teller? At a Lake Michigan Credit Union teller? So I drive back about 10 minutes after running some errands, and I drive up to the same teller, and I say to her, hey, I was here about 10 minutes ago, or 20 minutes ago, and I think I'd left my driver's license here. I took out $100 in cash, but I don't remember grabbing my driver's license. She looked on the table in front of her, on the counter in front of her, and she said, no, it's not here. Maybe you dropped it alongside one of the, where you put the tubes. And so I got out of the car and I started walking around. There are 4 entrances. I checked every one, especially the one that I drove into, and it wasn't there. I said, oh, crap. So I drive away, and I do a couple more errands, and I get home, and the first thing I have to admit, Jody, I lost my driver's license. And Jody says, again? It gets better. She holds out her hand and says, you mean this? And she's holding my driver's license. And I said, how do you get this? How did you get this? I asked dumbfoundedly. And she said, you must have left it in the tube when you got your $100, and the next customer who drove up found it, and he drove to our house to give it to you. It gets better. A person I had never met drove nearly 6 miles from that Lake Michigan Credit Union to deliver my driver's license. And as I confirmed with Jody, because I asked the question, he wasn't of my ethnicity or race. Now, sometimes we are as good as dead victims on some real or imagined roadside, at wit's end, out of options, out of luck, out of everything good in our life, sicker than a dead dog, and good people, sometimes holy people, godly people show up and pick us up. And when that happens, and it happens to all of us, give thanks. Give thanks with all your heart.